Today, we speak about a question that is not easy to answer. What would you do if 60 of your bravest sons were killed, not by accident, but by betrayal? This is not merely the story of 60 flag-draped coffins standing under the African sun. It is the voice of a nation being suffocated. But those 60 were not only soldiers, they were our voices, and someone tried to silence them with blood, with wounds, with loss. President Ibrahim Traoré stood in silence before the scene of mourning. No cries, no hasty declarations. He only spoke softly. They were not just soldiers, they were our voices. His words rang like the vow of a father to his children, of a leader to his nation. The ambush struck at 4:38 a.m. in the eastern borderlands near Dargo, where communications were cut, drones disabled, and 60 sons of the land never returned. The season of mourning began. The nation observed 3 days of silence. Television suspended entertainment. Every screen carried only the faces of the fallen, their names, hometowns, ages. The youngest was just 19. The oldest, 38, fathers, uncles, husbands, the pride of families and of the nation. Yet in that silence, something else began to grow. An unspoken call. Build the wall. Not a wall of concrete, but of defense built with intelligence, with resolve, with inner strength. This is not just the story of 60 soldiers who fell. This is the story of a nation reclaiming its breath, and of a continent reclaiming its voice. Tell us where you are watching from in the comments. Subscribe today, and stand with a new Africa, an Africa that will never kneel again. Wednesday, 4:38 a.m. on the military map. This area was known as the Dargo Corridor, a strip of land along Burkina Faso's eastern border, near the Sahel Triangle, a strategic zone, where Burkina's army had been quietly strengthening border patrols for months. But on that dawn, everything ended in the first 2 minutes. Communication signals were cut. Surveillance drones disconnected. Not a single distress call was sent. No reinforcements. No survivors. 60 soldiers killed. In silence. In the darkness of an ambush described as precise as a message. 2 days later, their bodies were brought back to the capital. The red, green, and yellow flag covered each one on government buildings. Large posters displayed the faces of the fallen soldiers. In bold black letters, they did not die in vain. Schools closed nationwide. National television broadcast only the names, ages, and hometowns of each soldier. No music, no comedy, only memory, only silence. But as the nation mourned, another current began to rise. Suspicion. Just 4 days before the ambush, President Traoré had rejected a U.S. diplomatic delegation. It was described by the West as a ceremony of honor to recognize Burkina for strategic cooperation. But the president did not attend. He did not shake hands. He did not accept medals. He called it a performance wrapped in promises. And now, 60 soldiers dead in a flawless ambush, one that only insiders could have known about. Patrol schedules, encrypted codes, system blind spots. Coincidence or consequence at the Kulba presidential palace when Traoré received the news. He asked the army chief only one question. Do we have satellite data of any foreign aircraft in the last 6 hours? No one answered. Only eyes lowered. A few hours later, he ordered no press conference, no direct accusations, but inside the presidential palace, documents began to be drafted. Personnel lists were revised. The chain of command was reshaped. A senior advisor described that moment as a controlled fire outside the capital, in the city of Bobo Dioulasso. Elders at the Grand Mosque held a prayer service, but in the courtyard, a debate broke out. "Do you see?" a man said, pointing at the radio. "This is the price we pay for standing upright." No one replied. At the University of Ouagadougou, students scrawled a new slogan on the walls: "Dignity has a price, and we are paying it." The national media shifted its tone. They no longer used the phrase, "we're attacked." They wrote instead, "a deliberate assault." A major newspaper ran the headline, "Reject the West, and they remind you who holds the trigger." But amid the storm of anger and grief, Traore remained silent. No rage, no tears, only a single order sent to the Ministry of Defense: build the wall. And from that moment, the funeral was no longer an ending. It became a beginning. Stay with us. This ambush is not just a loss, it is a warning. Share this video if you believe the truth deserves to be told in full, in many places. After the funeral comes tears. In Burkina Faso, after the funeral comes action. On the same day as the memorial for the 60 fallen soldiers, Traore inspected an abandoned facility outside the capital, an old factory from the Sankara era, once used to service military vehicles. The rusty gate creaked open under flickering lights. He stepped inside. No press corps, no speeches, only one sentence to the engineers waiting there. "We build here, we build now, and only with our own people." 3 days later, the first shipment of composite shells for domestically produced combat drones was delivered. No foreign contractors, no consultants from Washington or Paris, only the hands and determination of the Burkinabe people. The president signed an unprecedented decree, the creation of a national armed drone program, designed, developed, and operated by local talent. Its name, Operation Kulpelgo. This was not retaliation. This was a doctrine, a defensive strategy rooted in the people themselves, built with science, patriotism, and intellect. In Ouagadougou, physics teachers became instructors in radar defense. In Fada, technology students wrote algorithms for drones. In Kaya, farmers learned to read terrain to detect unusual movements at the border. On village walls, new posters were pasted beside the portraits of the fallen soldiers. Drone schematics, training manuals, red-marked maps of danger zones. In a small church in Banfora, a retired colonel looked at the new training program and quietly said, "This is not revenge. This is memory forged into muscle." The president did not launch a war. He launched a nationwide readiness. He convened a closed-door meeting with the National Defense Committee. No media, no translators, only strategy. And he said, "If we wait for permission to defend ourselves, then we have already surrendered." In the very first week, more than 4,000 citizens registered for basic defense training. In Tugan, carpenters turned their woodshops into training grounds. In Jibo, traditional hunters taught the skills of concealment and tracking. In Gawa, engineering students attached infrared cameras to low-cost devices to protect their villages. This was no longer national defense. This was a national awakening. In every school, children planted a tree in the name of a fallen soldier. In total, 60 freedom trees rose across Burkina Faso's 13 regions. Beside each tree stood a small plaque inscribed, "You fell so that we could stand." On an unannounced visit, Traore went to a school. The students stood at attention. A young girl handed him a small piece of paper. Inside was a handwritten poem. "We do not study history to remember pain. We study it to name the ones who caused it." Traore folded the paper, looked straight into her eyes, and said, "Call their names clearly, and don't forget to call your own, the defenders. Do not look away from this story. When grief turns into doctrine, every detail must be remembered." Share this video if you believe defending the homeland begins in the heart. What happens when not only the army, but the people themselves begin to learn how to defend? Not with weapons, but with knowledge, discipline, and responsibility. Within just weeks, Changes spread across Burkina Faso like an undercurrent. At the Ministry of Defense, the command structure was reorganized. Recruits were no longer chosen only for physical strength. They were evaluated on their ability to use electronic devices, understand digital signals, and read maps. Each province received its own direct budget, bypassing the slow central bureaucracy. Supply routes were redrawn, and red zones were marked using geolocation technology. This was not theater. This was policy, carved from real wounds in manga. A new class opened under a strange name, Theory of Civilian Warfare. It did not discuss weapons. It asked, why does war exist? Who profits from our silence? A teacher began the lesson with a map of Africa. He asked, the world calls this continent poor. But let me ask you, why is everyone fighting to take from it? A veteran stood up and answered, because we once allowed it, but never again. In carpentry workshops, artisans turned wood into training tools. At youth centers, group activities now included lessons in survival and emergency communication. Even artists joined in. In Batié, musicians transformed laments into songs of resistance. In Tikere, dancers staged performances in military formations, not to glorify war, but to express the spirit of national defense. In Yako, the Ministry of Heritage issued an unprecedented announcement. Keepers of indigenous knowledge, blacksmiths, hunters, healers, artisans, were authorized to train the younger generation. Skills included reading terrain, tracking animals, recognizing distant sounds, and identifying threats without equipment. They called it local logic, the kind of knowledge satellites cannot see. On the wall of a girls' school in central Burkina, students painted a massive mural, Traore raising his hand beside a freedom tree, planted by the children themselves. Every region planted trees. 13 provinces, 60 trees, 60 names beside each tree. A wooden plaque read, "You fell so that we could stand." A senior priest in Dori said, "For the first time in many years, I see generations breathing in rhythm together, not out of fear, but because they have remembered. The homeland is ours." At a cabinet meeting, some worried that aid would be cut. Traore replied simply, "If they want to cut, then we will learn how to reconnect ourselves." The next day, the Ministry of Finance announced a roadmap to gradually detach from the CFA-dependent monetary system. In Bamako, a team of financial engineers presented the first prototype for a joint reserve unit for the Sahel region. This was no longer a reaction. This was reconstruction, not to become a superpower, but to no longer be dependent. Stay with us to witness what is unfolding in villages, schools, and blacksmith workshops, when the people not only commemorate, but also learn to defend, with their minds, with their faith, with their intellect. When a small West African nation declares, "We will no longer wait for orders from outside to defend ourselves," the world cannot look away. In research centers in Paris and Washington, reports began to circulate with titles such as "Russia moves into the Sahel," and "Burkina Faso slips away from the Western democratic order." The UN Security Council expressed concern. NATO issued recommendations. The U.S. State Department voiced its deep concern. But inside Burkina Faso, no one panicked. They were busy, preparing. 48 hours after the attack that claimed the lives of 60 soldiers, an unmarked military plane landed at Bobo Dioulasso Airport. 11 Russian tactical training experts stepped off. No strings attached, no conditions. They did not come to control. They came to work. Traore did not ask for aid. He did not send a delegation to Moscow. He did not beg at conferences. There was only one order. They come on our terms. Otherwise, they do not come at all. They began training Burkina's army in border defense, drone signal jamming, and urban combat. No mercenaries, no foreign flags flying over national bases. Only one principle: defense sovereignty, at a meeting inside the Joint Forces facility. Traore said, "We are not gathering weapons to wage war. We are gathering discipline. If you aim a drone at my people, we will aim back with resilience." Keep watching, because when a small nation declares it will choose its own allies and write its own strategy, the world must listen again. What do you think when Western media leaves these parts untold? Share your perspective in the comments. This has never been only the story of 60 fallen soldiers, nor only the story of Burkina Faso. This is a wake-up call for an entire continent, and for anyone who has ever placed their trust in protection from the outside, from the heart of the Sahel. Ibrahim Traoré did not respond with anger. He did not call for revenge. He rewrote policy. He rearmed a people, and above all, he reminded Africa, "Our value does not need permission." In Europe, experts began to worry. In the United States, Burkina's satellite data was being updated weekly. But in Kaya, in Dori, in Tikere, children painted murals, sang songs, trained, and planted trees. Because they understood, this time. They were not merely being told that they had value. They were proving it themselves, through action, through intellect, and through unity. The question now is this the beginning of a larger wave? If Mali, Niger, and Chad adopt the doctrine of total people's defense, if the Sahel common currency is completed, if nations dare to reevaluate every contract, every kilometer of road, every hydroelectric station, could this be the opening chapter of a truly independent Africa? Tell us where you are watching from. Share this video if you believe the world needs to hear Africa's voice without intermediaries. Subscribe to the channel and stand with an Africa that will never kneel again.